We're going to do like a 3-week series where we're going to be talking about money. And I love what Mandy said at the beginning because it is always awkward, talking about money in church. Why are they talking about money? Well, we only do this about every 2 years. And as you know, we don't emphasize a lot except when it's giving to something like backpacks or sports camp or something like that where we really want you to be involved in our community and outreach and so on. But we talk about money in church because Jesus had a whole lot to say about money. In fact, how we look at money has a whole lot to do with where our heart is. Money and how we handle it becomes this diagnostic tool. And even more important, it reveals to us our level of faith and trust in God. And if you're here every week, we're going to give you ideas so that by the end of this, you can be a millionaire. Okay? Now the first step, write this down. You just got to go out and find $1 million somewhere. Okay? Start there. No, I'm not going to give you any ideas on getting money. For some of you, even though we believe more money would fix all of our problems, we don't have a money issue. It's always a heart issue. In fact, many times, I believe God would like to do more on our behalf or through us, but He won't give us something that's going to corrupt us or turn us away from Him. So we have to get this right, and we have to constantly think about it, because like Mandy said, we tend to compartmentalize our life. Sundays I'm at church, it's all about God. Monday morning maybe a little bit, or every morning as I connect with God, but then throughout the day, the decisions I make, the influences all around me, the culture I live in, everything is pulling me toward stuff that will make me happy. Okay? And I want to be transparent and share mistakes that I've made and so on, and we all face this. None of us are excluded from this, or none of us are above it. We all risk trusting something that can fail. And I think that's the key issue. When we put our trust in our ability or our job or our resources or our savings or our retirement or something like that, deep down inside, we know all of that could be gone in a moment. We could face a health crisis. We could have a family member in crisis. Something could happen, and all that we've worked for could be gone. Now, some people, it doesn't even take very much. I know some people that have savings and everything, and they've got an emergency fund and all that stuff, and then they'll come and say, things are bad. Really? How bad are they? We've had to dip into our savings. Well, what do you think you have them for? Well, we have them, but we don't use it. That's for rainy days and so on. And again, it just reveals that you can never have enough money to feel completely secure. And God intended it that way. Pascal, the 17th century philosopher, said this. He famously said, there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart, in the heart of every man which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator made known through Jesus Christ. In other words, there is a place in every human being that only God can bring fulfillment. And we can try to stuff a lot of things in there, and they will give us momentary happiness, like a drug or like buying something. We get that rush in the moment, but it doesn't last. Only God can fulfill us to the point where we are really content in life consistently. The Apostle Paul said it this way. He said they traded the truth of God for a lie. Now, what's the lie that humanity has believed? It's this. They worshiped and served the things God created instead of the Creator Himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. The biggest mistakes I've made in life financially have usually been when I haven't been trusting God, or I want something so bad, and then I get it and consume it and then still have to pay for it and realize it wasn't that fulfilling, you know? And these usually times I've gone into debt. And some of you, I know you've made huge. How many have made financial mistakes? Yeah, that's everybody. We all have. So today one of the things I want to do is just absolve you from guilt. Okay? No more condemnation on you. Unfortunately, the credit card companies and banks aren't so benevolent. You know, if you're in a financial situation, you've got to get out in some way. But it starts with the heart. It starts with changing our heart, our attitude, and our mind, and then things can begin to change. So I don't want to beat you up today. I want to give you really God's perspective on this, and I think this is really important. So I'm going to start with some bad news and then give you good news, okay? So here's the bad news, which you already know. Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich rule over the poor. The borrower, the one who is in debt, is a servant to the lender." Now that word servant just doesn't mean, we're friends or something. It's the Hebrew word chabed, which means slave. We are enslaved or in bondage when we're in debt. It's true. You say, well, I'm not enslaved. I mean, I've got some credit card debt and student loans and a mortgage and a car that, I can't afford. But beyond that, I'm doing okay. I'm meeting my bills. My nose is just above water financially. But yet I hear people say that, but in the next breath they make statements like this: well, we would like to get married, but we just can't afford it. Oh, we'd like to have kids, but we just don't have the resources. Oh, we'd like to get a home, but we have to keep renting because we're just not there. We'd love to be givers. I'd love to give to hungry kids, but I've got 3 at home that are hungry, I'd love to go on a missions trip. I'd love to bless somebody and help them. I'd love, like Mandy said, to buy somebody's meal in a restaurant. But if we're not free financially, and it's not about what we have in our pocket even, if we're not free in our heart, if we're not a giver by nature because God is a giver, and He has endless resources and supplies, so if we don't have that adjustment within us, we will always look at what we have and then decide whether we should give. See, and this is a mistake that I think we all fall into. I read an article this week that people are so dissatisfied with their jobs. I don't know if you saw this, but 95% of people are willing to leave their job. Think about that. That means only 5% of people in the country. It was crazy. I had to look at the article again, and 95% of people are willing to change jobs because they're just dissatisfied. Debt is overwhelming. It's like a weight that we carry and we can't put down. I remember a time, and thankfully God's really helped me in this area a lot, but I remember a time when one mistake I made. Lori could probably tell you a lot more, but I can think of this one. Have you ever been upside down in a car? You know what that means? It doesn't mean I rolled it over and physically and I was upside down in the car, hanging from my seatbelt. It means that I'd bought a car, say, for $5,000 that looked nice, but it was a piece of junk. And after driving it a little bit, say I now owe $4,000 on it, but it breaks. And it's really worth nothing now. But my benevolent car dealer, who loves me and is only thinking of my best, says, Tony, I've got a solution for you. We'll take that $4,000 you owe and put that into a new car. And you'll be able to drive this new car, and we'll stretch out the payments 6-7 years so that you can afford it. And by then you're going to be doing better, and this is no big deal. And so, and the interest rate's going to be kind of high too, because we got a lot of extra debt we're loading on top of the price of the car. And all of a sudden, you're a slave to that lender. And you resent the car every day. Somebody says, what a nice car. And you go, shut up. You know? Well, you're not alone if you've been in those situations. You know, the average U.S. household lives paycheck to paycheck. 50%, 56% of people in the most recent study, and some studies go as high as 61% of people live paycheck to paycheck. That means that if they don't get paid on Friday, the next week they're broke. They're in trouble. They might risk losing their car, their house, or something else. And why is that? Because more than 50% of Americans spend more than they take in. And that just doesn't add up. It doesn't take a financial expert to tell you you're going to be in trouble if that's the case. The problem is it's normal in our country to be in debt. Normal is a car payment, a house payment, student loan payments, and credit card payments. That's the norm. The norm is pressure on marriages financially. The norm is staying awake at night, worrying about how you're going to meet these bills. The norm is working extra jobs and a lot of overtime and everything just to try to make ends meet. But if you're a follower of Jesus, you have not been called to live a normal life. You have been called to live a supernatural life, and that means supernatural trust in God, which is something that the world doesn't know about. Like I said, this is so important that Jesus, 2/3 of his parables, about 1 in every 10 verses in the Gospels, relate to money and possessions. Do you realize that? 2/3 of Jesus' teachings. Because he knew this was so close to our hearts, where our loyalties lie. Either we're trusting God or we're not. 2,300 verses in the Bible relate to money. And so it's important to talk about. And today I want to focus on 2 temptations of money that are very relevant for today. Number one, I've talked a little bit about this, we're tempted to serve money. Now, you might not be in debt, and you may be feeling pretty good about yourself right now. But if your number one drive in life is a lifestyle, or to get to a certain place so you can feel good, then your issue is the same as the person who's broke. Because your focus, where you're drawing from, is the same place. You've just done a little bit better at it. See, this is so, there's such a conflict here. Going back to what Mandy said earlier, it's such a conflict because it's hard to trust God and to trust ourselves. We feel like we can balance that. Well, God gives me the money, but then it's completely mine and I handle it and everything else. No, as God gives us the resources, they're still his resources. And he's still our Lord. So that means he controls our life and our finances. In fact, I don't even try to use the terms my money, because it's his money. And Jesus delineated this very clearly in Matthew 6:24. Look at these words. He said, no one can serve 2 masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Why? Because both are described as masters. And masters don't want to share who they control with anybody else. God is a jealous God. He loves you. Just like if you are married and have a spouse, you don't want to share that spouse with anybody. You're in covenant. And this is the way God relates to us. Now, each of them want an exclusive hold on you, but we're not just talking about philosophy. I think one of the problems here is that we think of money as inanimate. You know, it's just a tool. It's just paper. Come on. It's just numbers on a screen. It doesn't mean anything. It can't control us. It's just money. It's all about how we handle it. Well, that's not the case. Because Jesus uses a specific word here. In the King James, it says, you cannot serve God and, you remember the word? Mammon. Now, interesting about mammon, and Jesus could have used another word for money, meaning just the exchange of money, but he specifically uses the word mammon. Now, mammon is interesting because mammon is not just money, but mammon is a god, a Syrian god. A Syrian god that was worshipped all the way back to the time of Babel. Many early Christian fathers related mammon to, they say a direct translation is Beelzebub. Here's the point, and if you want a lot more notes on this, because this is just a pretty exhaustive study, I put a lot more notes in YouVersion, and you can go through those in there on mammon. But here's the thing, mammon is not just a philosophy. It's not just money. It's a spirit, a living, breathing, demonic spirit who wants to control your life. You are not just making a choice as to what you're going to do with this money. What you're saying is, I'm either going to worship God with this, or I'm going to worship this demonic being. Wow. That's kind of strong, isn't it? But it's truth. Why do you think Jesus uses these words? Put up the next slide. Hate versus love. Devoted to, despised. If I ask you, everyone here, do you love God? Yes. Do you hate the devil? Yes. But when it comes to money, do you like God? Yes. Do you like money? Yes. See? But if you see, and again, it's not the actual money, because we can use it to worship God, or we can worship mammon. It's just who's going to control it? Who's going to control the heart behind it? Who are we going to follow? We see mammon all the way at the book of Revelation, because when it talks about Babylon, it's speaking about this God as well. And it describes a world system where no one could buy or sell lest those who had taken the mark. And we Christians freak out. I remember when credit cards came out years ago. I'm that old. And, and if it had 3 6s on there, man, you had taken the mark of the beast. And probably in most credit cards, there's going to be 3 6s in there somewhere. People just freaked out. And they still do today about that stuff. Well, I'll tell you, what it's really describing here is when we begin worshiping this world and this world system and this culture. And that's mammon. Again, mammon is trying to convince you that you don't need God. You just need more mammon. See? And there's a pull, whether it's God pulling us toward himself, saying, you need more of me. Or whether it's mammon pulling us that way, saying, you need more of me. We have to make a decision as followers of Jesus. I mean, if this was exposed for what it really was, and you saw this demon, and they looked like, the traditional things in horror movies, stuff like that, a goat and blood and all that kind of stuff, you'd go, ooh, that repulses me. I don't want anything to do with that. But it doesn't look like that. Instead, the vision that mammon paints is you can be happier. You can be more benevolent. If you'll just work harder. If you'll just go after this lifestyle. If you'll just pursue this, you'll be happy. This is the lie that has to be rejected. Jesus says here, you cannot serve 2 masters. It's impossible. But yet, every day, people are trying to do the impossible. They're trying to serve 2 different gods. Sobering, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to think of, I should give a little bit, and I should trust God more than my money, but I got things I want. But when we see it as this spiritual battle, Now we see why Jesus used such strong language. Why it was so important to him that our heart, at the heart level, is devoted to Christ. Many people hide this perspective behind statements that really sound honorable. I just want to give my children the lifestyle that I never had. So what are you giving them in a lifestyle? Say what your kids really need. They need Jesus. They need you to model a life of faith in devotion to Christ. Because they need to learn early. I was, sorry, Clayton and Starla, you guys are here. My kids are here. I had my grandson this week. Starla's already cringing. She don't know what I'm going to say, but Carson is 9. And we're going down to Dave & Buster's. Him and I are going to have a day. We're going to go down there and play games, stuff like that. And so on our way, he goes, okay, Grandpa, for Christmas this year, I don't want any toys. I just want cash. And he went on to estimate rather accurately, and that bothered me. He goes, generally, you guys spend about this much on toys. And Grandma Lily spends about this much on toys. And my mom and dad do too. So if you guys could all just go together and give it to me in cash, I would appreciate it. I wish you would have followed up with, I'm going to go see Dave Williams and start an investment program, but he didn't have that in mind, I said, well, what are you going to do with that money? He said, well, I'm going to buy some video game, about $50. I go, yeah? Well, we could buy you that. Yeah. Well, and then I want to get this jersey, this NBA jersey. Okay. What are you going to do with the rest? I don't know. But he's 9 and wants to control that money. Now, where did he get that from? He's just a good American. He's just being raised in a system that worships Mammon. And the devil doesn't care what demon you follow. Any of them will bring you down. We look at people that are involved in addiction, and maybe they're a heroin addict or something. We look at them and say, oh, those poor people, boy, they are so, demons are so influencing them. And then when we go out and buy something else that we can't afford, that we don't need, and think we're doing okay, unaware that that same spirit is influencing us, because the temptation is to serve money. Not only are we tempted to serve money, but number 2, we're tempted to love money. Paul writes, he says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Not money itself, but because money does great things. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the love of money, the lust after money, is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered away, wandered from their faith, and pierced themselves with many griefs. I've seen people get so depressed, I can't come to church because I'm just so down and feel so horrible and don't even want to be with other people or be with God. The word love here doesn't mean love in the sense of loving a person. It means to aspire to something. It's actually a picture. The way that Paul uses it, he grabbed this from the Greek language and applies it here. It's the picture of someone reaching out and extending as far as they can to get something, and they can't quite grasp it, so they're reaching and stretching as far as they can. And he said that is the perspective toward money. So we're either in this mode of reaching out and grabbing with all of our strength and determination, or we're in this posture to receive from God everything we need. Now, this doesn't mean we don't work jobs and we just sit at home and pray and expect God to take care of us. We're diligent. We're faithful where we are. We work as unto God wherever we are. And God honors that, and He blesses that. When you aspire and when you're chasing after this and you love money, when you aspire to it like that, I've said it many times, but it never surprises me what someone will do when their back's against the wall financially. They will cheat, steal, lie, betray, deceive. Even people say that they are followers of Christ in this need to preserve themselves and to fix their own situation. And you say, well, man, if I just had more money, I'd be more of a giver. I'd like to give more. But money generally just makes you more of what you already are. If you're greedy, it makes you more greedy. If you're a giver, it makes you more of a giver. It just magnifies what's already inside of you. That's why Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. We have to guard our hearts. We have to keep asking ourselves, do I really need this to be happy? Otherwise, we'll be ruled by and chasing things and suffering a lot of disappointment and heartache. Now, here's the good news. Money serves us as we serve God. When you get those in the right place, when God is first in your life, then money becomes a tool by which you say, God, it's yours. How can I bless somebody else? Even when you don't have it. You know, sometimes the biggest offerings that Lori and I have given, or the biggest sacrifices we've made financially, was when proportionately we had the least amount of money. Just because God says, I just want you to do it. I want you to remember that I'm your source. I want you to do this. I was thinking about this a couple days ago. Years ago, a couple, friend of ours, they were celebrating their anniversary, and they were going to Hawaii. And they invited us to go with them. And I was in business at the time. We could afford it. And, you know, it had been a great trip. I mean, you know, Hawaii, come on. And but Lori and I had been praying about it, and we knew another couple that had gone through some things financially, and they were really in a tough place. And God had spoken and said, send them on vacation. So we just took the money that we would have spent to go to Hawaii and gave it to them. And didn't think anything about it. Just obey God. It's His resources. Give this. And we did. And just said, He'll take care of us. A few years later, and this was for their 25th anniversary. A few years later, it was time for our 25th anniversary. And I wasn't in business anymore, and I was back in ministry. Didn't have quite as much money. But I wanted to do something special because it's our 25th anniversary. And one day out of the blue, I get this call from American Airlines. And they said, hey, we just want to contact you and let you know that you have 100,000 miles that are about to expire. And I said, I don't have 100,000 miles with American Airlines. And they said, oh, no, this was from TWA. They transferred over. Well, I didn't know that. I thought I just lost them. And I said, well, how much is 2 tickets to Hawaii? They said about 100,000 miles. I said, that's awesome. Now I got to afford a hotel in Hawaii. So this company Priceline had just started. So I thought, I'm going to try them. I'd never told Lori this, but, you know, I never would have told her. On our honeymoon, I just guessed, you know. So I put a really low amount in. And we ended up being able to stay for 5 days at the Hyatt Regency Resort in Maui. And so this whole vacation was a tiny amount. And it was just God saying, see, I can bless you, and I can bless you in kind as well. I can cause things to happen for you that are just as good as if I gave you the money. And I remember times that we've been super tight, and somebody would just take us out to a really nice restaurant. And I could just see God smiling and saying, see, you're okay. I got you. See, the beautiful thing is when you are content in God, when your heart is directed toward worshiping Him and not mammon, then you get up every day going, God, thank you that all my needs are met. You go to sleep at night in peace because God's taking care of you. And it doesn't matter how much you owe. You can have that perspective whether you have a lot in the bank or you can have that perspective if you don't have any. You can also be worried when you lay down at night, whether you have a lot in the bank or whether you have nothing. I've met greedy people that are rich. And you know what? I've met a lot of greedy people that are poor too. And I've seen poor people give proportionately to their wealth at higher degrees than people that were rich. And that's common. So my challenge to you is to think about what life could be like. To first of all evaluate, where's my devotion? Is my heart fully devoted to God in this area? Or am I being influenced by this demonic entity that wants to pull me away from God? I want you to see this as a spiritual battle that God wants you to win. And I want you to imagine what life could be like not living in fear. See, the minute you turn your heart toward God in this, it doesn't mean your debt's going to go away. It may take you a while to get out of debt. But while you're on that journey, you have complete confidence that God is taking care of you. That's where God wants you to live. And He may want you to be in that place for a while, to just get this ingrained down inside of you. But what you want is more of God and more of His heart. And you want to be discipled in this area. So your heart is, God, I'm with you no matter how long this takes, no matter what I have to do, I'm going to follow you in it, and I trust you in the meantime to take care of my needs. And I believe that's where God meets us, and that's where He begins this journey of walking with us. So this is not simply about giving an offering or being benevolent. This is about where your heart is centered. Is Jesus the center of your life? And do you trust Him as your source? That's the question that we have to ask. And that will determine, more than anything else, what our life will look like financially, and whether or not we'll have security, and whether or not we'll lay our head down on the pillow at night at peace.